G'day guys, Tillis20 here and welcome to the very last episode of Bordertown. Pretty sad to be saying that, sad but also kind of excited for new projects. It's a little bit of a bittersweet when you end a series. Actually, when I say that, I've only ended one series before. I'm still going on with my projects that I have been working on since starting a YouTube channel. The only other series that I've ever properly finished would probably be Osara, which I did with Skibbeth, and all my other ones are still, I guess, somewhat current because I just chip away at them as time goes on. And yeah, it's because I haven't really finished up a project before. It feels sort of strange when I closed down the save game and sort of recorded my last shot in Bordertown, placed my last prop down. I sort of felt kind of strange, you know, just saying goodbye to it like that, because knowing that I most probably won't open up the save game again, as far as I can tell. So yeah, feeling a little bit sad to be saying goodbye to Bordertown, but a little bit excited for future projects that I'll talk about in this episode. So this is the last build episode. I'll talk about what I'm going to be doing in just a second. There will be another video up of Bordertown next week, which will be a cinematic overview. I have to admit, I was trying to do something a little bit different, and then I don't know, I don't think it turned out as fantastic as I was hoping. But I'd actually already spent such a long time recording the cinematics for it and all the videos that I feel like it just didn't really come together exactly how I'd planned. I think it's still nice, but I think I've done better with my other cinematic overviews. But regardless, that'll be out next week, and that'll probably wrap up everything. And then we've got Marble Mountain back starting next week, which is also pretty exciting with some big changes in that series too. But in this episode, this is the very last build episode, and I've sort of left the last big thing that I wanted to build in Bordertown for this episode, and that's working around the border. So this is something that has pretty much sparked this entire series in the first place, and that is the fact that two countries can meet in one area, and it's always just such a weird clash of cultures, such a weird clash of people. And I think the way that governments sort of deal with borders in general, you know, how it changes depending on which country you're in, or the countries that connect up in this way, I think it's so interesting. Maybe it's because in Australia all our borders are in the water, so you don't really get to see them. But I also just think it's so strange that there's just this invisible line, and it's kind of like, well, this is my country, and then this is your country, and you can pretty much just walk across a border, or, you know, fly across a border, or catch a boat across a border, and, you know, you're in another country. And for some reason, it always feels like the country changes when you cross. You know, I've crossed the border from India and Nepal, and I didn't think I'd notice a huge difference at the border, but as soon as I crossed the border, I was like, okay, this is India. And a couple of weeks ago, I crossed the border from Kazakhstan to Kyrgyzstan, and literally in the desert, like there was nothing around me, but as soon as I crossed the border, I was like, yeah, like now I'm in a different country. It's a weird like mind switch, but you always feel it, and I just think it's so cool. So I think that's probably what started this whole series in the first place, is just thinking about borders. I've crossed a few of them, and every time I do, I always think that's such a mind flip out. So I think that's what started this series in the first place. I also think I might have watched a documentary, but I can't really remember. A whole year ago for some reason, I can't remember what I did a year ago. So the border of El Paso and Juarez, I always thought was a really interesting one in particular. I always think that the American and the Mexican border just in general is really fascinating. So I chose these two cities to really represent this series and to sort of make my own, which has been just so much fun. And yeah, I really just want to represent it really well in this episode, is just to show the two different sides. So in the first half of this episode, I'm going to be working on the US, which is what I'm doing right now, and then I'll be doing around the Mexican border too. And I should also say that this isn't like me trying to represent America or Mexico in a particular way. I think I need to say that in every episode, but I really just wanted to show like two different sides. So I was trying to do like really big contrasting differences in this episode. So really try not to paint either one of those countries in a particular light. So working around the suburbs, this is the suburb that I've been working on over the last couple of weeks. Basically, this suburb is on the other side of the tracks. It's a little bit, I don't know, probably not as nice as some of the other suburbs that are around Las Palmas. And there's also this train line that is behind them. Actually, these houses back onto the border, so they're like right on the border, which again, super cool. I think that is so crazy. You could literally just wave and you could see people from the other side of the river leading into another country. And I also wanted to do something a bit different and give these guys a bit more of a grassy backyard. So I'm actually using these Ronix grass props. I think they're props. I don't know if they're trees, but they're actually props. And they help just to give a bit more of a lawn look, because we're really struggling in what is such a dry texture pack that I'm using. Not a texture pack, what is it? A map theme. Must be thinking about another game. And yeah, you can also see some really great Border Patrol cars driving across that dirt road. That is something that I really love about this series, is you can actually see the Border Patrol taking different routes around the border, which is always super, I don't know, you guys probably didn't see it quite as well, but for me, it's so cool seeing that. It really adds a lot to the series. They were actually made by Celsius. He made a whole bunch of vehicles, which you can actually find on the Steam Workshop if you're interested in making something similar. And that train line as well that you can see, so that is a train line that is connected up to the line that goes into in between both countries. And I think that line is probably meant for trains that are like just waiting to get in there, or trains that have just come in that might be going through a bit of a check, because I don't know if you can notice, but this train is we're sort of in between. It's like in a bit of a no man's land, which I could never really tell looking at the border. It's always looks like that there's like a bit of a space around this river that, or at least this river kind of dips in and out of being like Mexican territory or the US territory. It's very, it's kind of hard to tell, because you've got like a very clear border on the US side, but then it's not really that obvious around the Mexican side. So it's, yeah, I guess this train would be like subject to quite a lot of inspections if it's going in between two different countries, particularly with such a huge load that it actually carries. These trains are massive that go in between this in between these cities. And like I said in the last episode, this whole district that's around this like in between these train lines, it's a bit more industrial than the other suburbs as well. So I really wanted to have a mix between like some houses and also some like more desolate areas, so you can see me working on some sandy parts that don't really have any ownership. And there's also some like car parks, and it's a bit more of an outskirt of the town sort of area. Even though we're still quite close to the downtown, somewhat close, I did want there to be like a real element of like we're on the outskirts of the city. And that's why I'm doing quite a lot of work around the dirt, and I'm using a lot of these really great decals too that you can see me using. These are like, I think it might be Ronix who created them, I'm not entirely sure, but they're actually decals that match the theme that you're using, and you can get really nice blends between like your road textures and your oil colors, and like even the ground textures. You can get really nice overlays, and something that I often forget about, but when I end up doing it, I'm like, these look so fantastic. They blend in really beautifully. If you're interested in any of the things that I'm using, by the way, they're all in the description below. There's actually a link to my asset collection that has a whole bunch of assets and mods that I use in this series. Also, I have been getting a lot of questions whether or not I'm going to upload the save game to the Steam Workshop. I'm not going to, purely because it's just like got a lot of local assets that you will also need to download like extra files, and you'll need to like have a pretty decent computer, and to be honest, it doesn't run very smoothly. It requires a lot of assets and mods to run the way it does, and a lot of people who download it from the Steam Workshop will probably just expect it to run straight away. So I don't really want to break people's games with, all the technicality of what it takes to actually run a save game like this. It is, though, available to patrons, so if you support the channel, it's one of the tiers that you get all my save games every time I upload an episode. I was chatting to them the other day, and they've been playing on it, and people have downloaded it, and it's been actually quite easy for them. So if you are interested in becoming a patron, that is like a really great way to support the channel and also get the save games. If you're desperate for the save game, you can always become a patron, download the save game, and then stop being a supporter. Totally do it if you want to. I notice some people do that every now and again, which, each to their own, I guess, but just know that your support is actually getting me that little bit closer to being able to do this as a full-time job, which is the absolute dream. And I'm still quite far away from getting there, to be honest, but every little bit helps. So huge thanks to my patrons who are listening to this. So this area that I am working in at the moment is what I'm calling no man's land, and this is something that I've seen in quite a lot of countries. I'm assuming that's the same case in this scenario, being El Paso and Juarez, but usually there's like a stretch of land, and it's not usually very big, and it's quite often like around where water sources is. So borders do generally happen around water, whereas if it's like a stream or a river or like a big body of water, I guess it makes it a much clearer way to distinguish where like people's property is. And I've also been to places where like borders are literally just a fence, and you can actually walk up and touch the fence, and on the other side is another country. But I guess being like in a city, there's like two cities bordering each other, and a lot of people being in the cities, that there needs to be an area that is just not, has like no access to people. And I guess that's just for surveillance and to make sure no dodgy stuff's happening underneath the fence or people like going in and out. But I don't know if that's the case in El Paso and Juarez. So if you are someone who lives in either one of those cities, which I know a lot of you actually are, which is very cool, let me know what this body of water is and what actually happens between these two cities, these two countries, because I do find it quite interesting that there is this stretch of water and this land that is very there's no real activity that's happening around here except for the occasional person walking around, doing maintenance, or people who are working around here, or even some of the border patrols, which you can actually see my cars driving around, which looks so cool. Some things that I've been doing in terms of detailing is this river, which again, can't remember the name of the river for some reason, but this river, I did a bit of detail work on it, and I really didn't want to just flood water through there because I know that's quite much easier option. I instead wanted it to look a little bit more shallow and a little bit more dried up. So I ended up using these decals made by Ronix. They're actually quite an old decal. They've been out for ages, but they work really nicely if you just sink them into the ground a little bit and just let a little bit of it pop up. And then around the edges, I've just been just creating a bit more foliage to just hide a couple of the imperfections, but also there is a lot of foliage around water, naturally, of course. So that actually helps to create that water effect. It's something that I've used in a couple of other cases as well. I've used it in Marble Mountain. It's actually something that works really nicely. So if you ever want to create like a little stream, quite often you don't actually have to place down any water or any like decals. I could have achieved the same result just by placing down some more greener foliage around the ridges of that water around that canal, I guess, and then created that river look. And I've also done a little bit of detail work just placing down some surveillance cameras, because there's actually an opening here, and this is actually an opening that exists in the real life El Paso, and I thought that was really cool that there's actually this area that I guess people can just walk in if there weren't these surveillance cameras. So I thought I should probably put some protection in like that. And now I'm finally getting back over to Juarez and just doing a little bit more detail work, placing down some buildings and some car parks. This area, I wanted it to be a lot different to the US side, and I didn't really have a huge amount of room to work with, so I couldn't really place down any bigger buildings, which is actually a bit more around this area in real life Juarez. So instead, I decided to place down a couple of like abandoned looking buildings. I've got this parking lot too, which I think serves more of the buildings that are around this area, because a lot of the buildings I'm going to be placing around this side of the border is going to be like abandoned. Trees are starting to like reclaim that land, and I think I just wanted another excuse to make some abandoned looking areas, because you guys know how much I enjoy creating areas that look like that. And now I'm back in the US side. I decided I wanted to drag around some utility poles, which actually adds so much realism to an area, which I always forget to do. But yeah, it's insane how fantastic these electrical poles actually add to the realism. So I decided to do that because this is such a highly detailed spot that I thought should really finish it off with some really great looking assets, which are these telegraph poles. And I don't know if you noticed, I might have been a bit too quick, but I wanted to place down some flags that yeah, I've never really placed down. I probably didn't utilize quite as much as I could have. And that's the American flags. I decided to place a couple of them on some of the houses. Didn't want to go too overboard, but I think, yeah, I think I really didn't maximize on that asset. And something that I don't know if you have noticed me do, but I've actually used the tags that have been introduced. I'm not sure if it was introduced within the game or whether it was introduced as a feature in Find It, but I've been using the tags quite a lot in Bordertown, and basically every time I see something that I think is perfect for the series, I'll just type in the tag MEX, which is just like a really quick way of finding that asset. And yeah, basically whenever I'm detailing or doing something in Bordertown, I can just quickly type that in and find a whole bunch of assets that I've already given that tag, and that works really nicely, and I've been doing that heaps in my new series. Just yeah, it makes detailing really, really nice and easy. So the flags are actually in there, and I, for some reason, totally forgot about them, because I'm pretty sure I've only used those American flags like once. Now, finally, finishing off this episode by placing down some of Beard Monkey's amazing assets that he created for the series, and really sad to be saying goodbye to those assets, because I'm probably not going to use them for at least a while, because this series is finished. And so is this episode. Guys, thank you so much for all your support for this series. I have really, really enjoyed Bordertown. I've had an absolute ball creating episodes for it, and all the interaction and all the comments you guys have been leaving me has been really fantastic. So thank you guys so much for it. I've really loved it. I'm going to be sad to say goodbye to it, but all good things have to come to an end, and I am excited for what I have installed for you all. Guys, thank you so much. Next week, enjoy the cinematic overview video, and I will also have an episode of Marble Mountain up for you too. But that's it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.